The scream tore through the desert air just as the sun dipped below the red hills of West Texas. I'll never forget that sound, not in this life or the next. I was riding back to town after checking the northern pasture, saddle creaking under me and the heat clinging to my skin like a second shirt. Folks around here call me Elias Boone. Some say I look like a ghost white hair, pale skin, and red-tinted eyes that don't care much for the sun. Albinism, they say. Me? I just call it life. My horse, Dusty, had been twitchy all afternoon, like he sensed something bad was brewing. That's when I heard it again. Not a scream this time, but sobbing, desperate, raw, and close. I pulled back on the reins and looked toward the tracks that split the land like a scar. What I saw lying there on the gravel, bound and bleeding in the last light of day, would change everything. And deep down, I already knew I was riding straight into a trap. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her arms were pinned beneath thick ropes, wrists rubbed raw and bleeding where she'd fought against them. Her blue dress was torn at the shoulders, dust and sweat staining the fabric. I jumped down from Dusty, boots crunching against the gravel as I ran toward her. The last of the sun burned low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the track like nature itself was holding its breath. She looked up at me through strands of tangled hair. Her mouth was gagged, her eyes wild not just with fear, but something else too. Recognition, like she knew me. Or worse, knew this was meant for me. I dropped to one knee beside her and pulled out my pocket knife. The blade was dull, worn from years of skinning rabbits and carving fence posts. I began sawing through the first rope, but it was thick hemp, tight as wire, wrapped around her like someone had taken their time. This wasn't the work of a drunken fool or some vagrant with a grudge. No, this was methodical, planned. I'd seen knots like that once before, back when I tracked fugitives through the Badlands for bounty money. Each stroke of the blade was a race against time. I could feel her breath growing faster, her whole body trembling beneath the bonds. She tried to speak through the cloth gag, eyes darting toward the horizon pleading, warning. I couldn't tell. I worked faster, sweat stinging my eyes, fingers trembling as I tried to steady my hands. Then I heard it, the low, mournful whistle of the evening freight train. The sound drifted across the plains like death's own trumpet call. I knew that train. It came through every evening around sunset, hauling lumber and iron up to the northern mining towns. And I knew how long we had, maybe 10 minutes, probably less. Still, I cut, rope by rope, strand by strand. Her breathing grew sharper as I freed one arm, but the rest of her was still bound like a hog at branding time. I tugged the gag from her mouth, just as the rails began to hum beneath us. Her voice was hoarse, broken. "They're coming back," she gasped. "You have to leave me, please, just run." But I wasn't going anywhere. Not with a train bearing down on us, and not when a stranger's eyes held that kind of terror. I shook my head. "Ain't leavin' you here?" I muttered, teeth clenched as I dug the blade into another coil of rope. Her eyes filled with something I hadn't expected: sorrow. Not fear, not gratitude, just deep, aching sorrow. "My name's Clara," she said between ragged breaths. "Clara Whitmore. I work at the general store, up in Dead Horse Bluff. I was walking back from visiting my mother when they grabbed me." "Who?" I asked, though my gut already had its suspicions. She hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the distant ridges beyond the tracks. "The Bellington brothers," she finally whispered. "Silas, Wade, and Eli. They said they wanted to send a message loud enough for the whole state to hear." The name sent a chill through me, worse than any desert wind. The Bellington gang had been a thorn in this territory's side for over a year, no rustling cattle, robbing stagecoaches, and putting 2 lawmen in the ground. No one had ever gotten close to catching them. Every time the law did try, witnesses disappeared, evidence vanished, or someone's barn mysteriously caught fire. But thysteing a preacher's daughter to railroad tracks? That was darker than anything they'd done before. The whistle blew again. Closer now. I felt it deep in my chest, like the beat of a war drum. My hands moved faster, trying to ignore the splinters and blood under my nails. I freed her left arm, but the ropes around her legs were still knotted tighter than a bull rope before a rodeo ride. That's when Clara's eyes widened. "They're here," she said, voice cracking. I followed her gaze. Up on the ridge, maybe a quarter-mile off, 3 riders sat on their horses still as statues, outlined by the fading glow of dusk. Even from that distance, I could see them clearly. They weren't hiding. In fact, they wanted to be seen, watching like coyotes waiting for the wounded to fall. Clara began to tremble all over. "They said someone would come," she said softly. "That someone always tries to be the hero. They just wanted to see who." The sick realization hit me like a punch to the ribs. This wasn't about robbery. It wasn't even about vengeance. This was theater, a stage set for a killing. Clara had been bait, and I was the audience and the intended star of the final act. "They said if anyone tried to help me," she whispered, "they'd burn down my father's church. Said they wanted to teach the county what happens when good people push back." Her voice broke, and the meaning behind her words cut deeper than any blade. Clara's father, Reverend Thomas Whitmore, had been the loudest voice calling for justice in these parts. He'd written letters to Austin, testified in court against the Bellingtons after their last arrest. The judge had let them go on some nonsense technicality, but Reverend Whitmore had shamed them in front of the whole town. This wasn't just a trap. It was war. And they'd picked Clara as their first casualty. But I wasn't about to let them win. The sun was almost gone now, leaving the sky streaked in lavender and rust. The wind picked up, dry and hot, carrying with it the distant rattle of dry brushed hooves, heavy ones. The 3 riders on the ridge started moving. They came slow, steady, like they had all the time in the world. They weren't afraid. No need to be. From where they stood, they figured this story was already written. I stood up slowly, careful to keep myself between Clara and the oncoming threat. The train tracks beneath my boots were starting to hum louder now, the weight of the evening freight train closing in with merciless rhythm. I counted the beats in my head. 3 minutes, maybe less. The Bellingtons stopped about 30 yards out, spreading out in a line, horses side by side. The middle one was the biggest, broad shoulders, black coat, long-barreled rifle resting lazily across his saddle horn. That was Silas Bellington, the oldest. His 2 younger brothers flanked him, Wade to the left, twitchy and grinning, and Eli to the right, younger than I expected, no older than 20, with wild eyes and fingers dancing near his pistol. Silas was the one who spoke first. "Well, well," he drawled, voice like gravel dragged over bone. "Looks like the preacher's girl caught herself a guardian angel. Ain't that sweet?" I didn't answer. My right hand rested near my holster, loose and ready. My left still throbbed from yanking rope. "You boys picked the wrong woman to mess with," I said evenly. Silas laughed at a dry, cruel sound. "And you must be Elias Boone, the albino cowhand with a taste for lost causes. Heard you used to hunt men down south, Arizona territory, wasn't it?" I kept my eyes locked on his. "That was a long time ago." "Not long enough," Wade chimed in. "They say you shot 8 men dead back in '82. 7, I corrected, almost without thinking. "And they all deserved it." Eli chuckled. "Guess that makes you dangerous." Silas tilted his head. "Nah, makes him a fool. Dangerous men don't ride into traps they should have seen a mile off." He spat in the dust. "Here's how this ends, Boone. You turn around. You walk away. You get back on that pale horse of yours and pretend you never saw a damn thing out here. You do that, and maybe we let you live. And if I don't—" Wade's grin widened as his hand slid over the butt of his pistol. "Then we shoot you down and make sure word gets back to town that Elias Boone tried to play hero and ended up railroad meat." The train let out another whistle, this one long, low, and close, the kind that meant you were out of time. I could feel the ground trembling now, hear the steel wheels grinding around the canyon bend. Clara whimpered behind me, still struggling with the last of the rope around her ankle. Blood soaked the hem of her dress. I knew what the Bellingtons thought. They figured I was like most men, proud, maybe brave, but practical when push came to shove. They expected I'd back down, maybe beg, maybe run. They didn't know what I'd already decided. I wasn't leaving her there. Not for 1,000 trains. Not for 3 guns pointed my way. I took a slow breath, tasting dust and steel in the air, and stared Silas dead in the eyes. "You want a war, Bellington?" I said, low and calm. "You just brought it to the wrong county." Silas's threat still hung in the air when my Colt cleared leather. I fired first one smooth pull, years of muscle memory guiding the barrel. The shot cracked across the flats like a dry lightning strike. Eli Bellington, the youngest, never touched his gun. The slug caught him square in the chest and knocked him backward out of the saddle, boots slipping from the stirrups as he hit the dirt 10 yards behind his horse. Wade reacted quicker than I'd hoped. His revolver flashed, and white-hot pain ripped through my left shoulder. The impact spun me half around, dropping me to one knee. Clara screamed my name, but I locked my good hand on the Colt's grip, forced my focus past the sting, and squeezed off a second round. My bullet shattered Wade's gun hand. His weapon flew free, clattering onto the ballast beside the tracks. He howled, clutching a mess of blood and bone. Silas swung his long rifle off the saddle horn and aimed for my head. Just then, the rails beneath me began to shake in earnest. The freight train, barreling around the bend less than a quarter-mile off, headlamp glaring like a second sunset. Its whistle let out a mournful wail that rattled every nerve in my body. 90 seconds, maybe less, until iron met flesh. Dusty, my sorrel gelding, sidestepped skittishly behind me, but held. Good horse. Silas fired. The round kicked up a spray of gravel inches from Clara's feet. I dove sideways, rolled, and returned fire, but the rifle gave him reach. I couldn't match. He kept his horse pacing, making himself a small, swaying target, every squeeze of his trigger sending another lethal shout downrange. Jagged rock sliced my palm as I crawled back to Clara. No time for pain, only time for choices. Between shots, I shouted, "When I give the word, keep your head down and don't move." She nodded, tears carving clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Another boom from Silas's rifle, and suddenly a new sound cut through the chaos, a chorus of pounding hooves from the east. I risked a glance. Cresting the low ridge came Sheriff Clay Morgan, coat flapping behind him like a battle flag, 3 deputies hard on his heels. Their Winchesters barked before Silas even registered they'd arrived. One round clipped his hat clean off, another punched into Wade's thigh, and the outlaw toppled face first into sagebrush. Silas wheeled his horse toward a boulder for cover, still determined to finish me before the train did. I used the distraction to stagger back to Clara. My left arm was dead weight, blood soaking my shirt front, but I wrapped my right hand around the remaining rope at her ankle. It wouldn't budge. Somewhere behind us, the locomotive engineer leaned on the whistle-only high, desperate, keening notant. I felt the ground thunder like a drum roll beneath my knees. 70 feet, 60. The engine's headlamp washed over us, turning every shadow knife-sharp. Silas popped out from behind the rock, lining up for one final shot. I fired first blind, but blessed catching him in the shoulder and driving him flat against the boulder. Sheriff Morgan's second round finished the job. Silas's rifle clanged against the stone and slid to the dirt. I didn't wait to see him fall. With the train less than 6 heartbeats away, I jammed my boot between rail and rope, heaved with everything my aching body had left, and felt the hemp start to give. Clara braced, stifling a sob as fibers snapped one by one. Behind us, iron wheels screamed on steel. 2 heartbeats. 1. The last strand parted, and we tumbled off the track together, landing hard on the cinder bed as the freight thundered past in a blur of rust-red boxcars and wind hot enough to sear our faces. Sparks showered overhead, mingling with desert dust and the copper scent of blood. We were alive, but the night's reckoning had only begun. The freight's roar faded, leaving only settling dust and the tick-tick of cooling steel. Clara and I lay flat, lungs burning, hearts drumming against our ribs. I reached for her ankle to make sure she was free and froze. A thumb-thick cuff of braided hemp, threaded through a bronze-colored puzzle lock, still cinched her leg to the rail. We'd broken the outer ropes, but this contraption was buried beneath the coiled final snare I hadn't seen in the chaos. "Elias, it's tightening," Clara whispered, wincing as the band dug deeper with every twitch. I tugged, but the lock's braided core only ratcheted tighter, biting into skin. My knife blade glanced off a steel plate hidden inside the weave. Behind us came a scraping groan. Silas Bellington, shirt front blooming crimson, staggered from behind the boulder, with a Colt dragoon in one hand and a small brass key dangling from the other. Moonlight newborn over the ridge caught the blood on his chin, painting him half ghost, half devil. Sheriff Clay Morgan aimed his Winchester. "Drop it, Silas. It's over." Silas laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Over? Preacher's girl ain't going anywhere without this." He held the key higher, letting it glint. "Custom work. Without it, that lock's tighter than a banker's fist." I rose, Colt steady despite my bleeding shoulder. "Hand it here. Nobody else needs to die tonight." "Ah, see, that's where you're wrong." Silas's smile widened as he thumbed back his revolver's hammer. "Tonight's about messages, Boone. Folks gotta learn there's a price for meddlin'." He flicked his wristband, the key arced in a glittering parabola, disappearing into waist-high sage 40 yards off. "Clay!" I yelled. The sheriff's men dashed toward the spot, lantern swinging, but in the dark it might as well have been the Gulf of Mexico. Silas wasn't done. He yanked a stubby red cylinder from his coat pocket dynamite, fuse already sputtering gold sparks in the dry night air. "Insurance," he rasped. "If the train didn't do the job, this surely will." He cocked his arm to throw. Clay's Winchester cracked. The slug slammed into Silas's chest, spinning him sideways. But even a dying man can finish a wicked deed. The dynamite left his fingers, tumbling end over end toward the rail. Instinct took over. I shoved Clara flat and threw myself across her, hot pain lancing my shoulder. The fuse hissed wickedly as it skidded to a stop inches from the lock, still biting her ankle. "Elias," she breathed, eyes wide with terror. "Hold still," I muttered, feeling every second bleed away with the sparks. Somewhere behind us, Clay shouted orders, boots pounded, but all I saw was that sputtering fuse and the bronze puzzle slowly chewing into Clara's flesh. The Bellingtons were finished yet. Their trap was far from sprung. The fuse hissed like a rattler in the weeds, throwing pinpoints of light across Clara's terrified face. I braced for the blast-counted heartbeats the way I once timed a quick-draw match. 4, 3, 2, and then nothing. The spark guttered, sputtered once more, and died against the powder-dry ballast. The dynamite lay there, as harmless as a chunk of red cornbread. For a moment neither of us moved. Wind whistled over the empty track. A tumbleweed rolled by, as if even it had someplace safer to be. Then Clara let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. I felt my knees go weak-knot from blood loss. though heaven knew I was leaking plenty but from the sudden roar of relief flooding every nerve. Behind us, Sheriff Clay Morgan barked orders. Deputies Wilkes and Donnelly hauled the surviving Bellington brothers to their feet. Wade, his gun hand a ruin and his thigh bleeding, whimpered every time the deputies dragged him forward. Eli lay still where he'd fallen, eyes wide to the stars. Silas's body slumped against the boulder, head tilted at an unnatural angle. A single plume of gun smoke drifted above him like incense over a sinner's grave. Clay strode over, Winchester still at the ready. "Boone, you two all right? Alive?" I managed, voice rough as gravel. But Clara's still shackled. I nudged the bronze lock with my boot. The ratchet clinked tighter. She winced. Clay knelt, studied the mechanism in the lantern glow. "That's no ranch hand knot." He scratched his jaw. "Deputy Morrison's our best bet boy, apprenticed under a locksmith back in Abilene." "Morrison's fetching a lantern now," Wilkes called from the ridge, breathless. "Key's long gone, ground out there's thick with sage might as well be a haystack and a needle." I squeezed Clara's hand. "We'll get you free yet." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. "Elias, if that dynamite had worked—" "If is a dead word," I said, though my shoulder throbbed like a forged bellows. "It fizzled. So did their plan. We breathe. That's what matters." A freight brakeman trotted up, hat in hand, face pale as the moon. "We'll send a telegraph to Fort Stockton, Sheriff. Track'll stay closed till daylight." "Appreciate it," Clay answered. He looked back at me. "We've got maybe an hour before a relief crew shows. Let's use it." He tore a strip from Wade Bellington's shirt, tied off my bleeding shoulder with practiced hands, then sent Donnelly to scour the saddlebags for tools. All the while, Clara kept her voice soft, soothing, half for me, half for herself, telling stories about the store, about her mother's peach cobbler, about sermons her father loved. I realized she was keeping me conscious, giving my mind a rope to hold while my body tried to shut down. Minutes crawled by. The desert cooled fast after dark. I started to shiver in the dry breeze. Clay draped a blanket over us, its wool scratchy but warm. Somewhere beyond the railbed, a coyote let out a long, lonesome howl like it mourned the souls claimed tonight. Lantern light flickered across Silas's discarded revolver and the silent dynamite. One mispacked stick, one miracle, had spared us. But we weren't out of the woods knot with Clara still anchored to iron, my shoulder hanging useless, and the truth of this night poised to shake half the state awake. A deputy's shout split the hush. "Sheriff, Morrison's here. At last. Help for the cursed lock." I closed my eyes a second, whispered a tired prayer of thanks, and prepared for the next battle fought with picks and patience instead of bullets and bluff. Survival, I was learning, comes in stages. We'd cleared the first, but dawn promised another reckoning. Moonlight draped the wrecked siding in pale silver, turning the twisted ropes and empty shell casings into quiet monuments of what we'd survived. A lantern hissed beside us, its warm glow fighting back the chill that settles on the high plains after midnight. Sheriff Clay Morgan finished briefing the railroad crew, then strode over, dusting soot from his duster. "Boone, Miss Whitmore," he began, voice low so the deputies wouldn't overhear. "We need the whole story, start to finish. Tonight can't stay a footnote in somebody's ledger." Clara shifted, wincing as she adjusted her bandaged ankle. "Sheriff, this didn't start with the Bellingtons. They're pawns." She drew a shaky breath, glanced at me for resolve, and plunged ahead. "My father discovered forged deeds dozens spread across 3 counties. Land belonging to small ranchers, widows, veterans, people who can't afford lawyers. Each deed had the same notary stamp and the same approval signature, Judge Everett Pike." Clay's brow furrowed. "The circuit judge? He's been on the bench 15 years. Clara nodded. "Long enough to line his pockets. My father traced the money back to Randall Kincaid, State Land Commissioner out of Austin. Kincaid's been funneling parcels to Eastern investors, marking up sale prices, and splitting the profit with Pike and any lawman willing to look the other way. Those of us fighting back, we get warnings: a barn fire, a dead steer, or tonight's nightmare. The sheriff exhaled, breath turning white in the cooling air. That explains why warrants against the Bellingtons kept evaporating. But evidence this big can disappear faster than dew at sunrise. Where is it? Clara lowered her voice further. Under First Light Church, 2 blocks off the town square. Father buried a strongbox 4 feet beneath the pulpit oak boards, pewter corners, weighs about 40 pounds. Inside are certified ledgers, bank drafts, and Pike's personal correspondence. He hid it after receiving a note that read, "Next heard sermon will be your last." I felt a fresh wave of respect for the old preacher. Digging a hole beneath his own sanctuary, hiding truth where gospel is spoken seemed fitting. But the risk was staggering. "Clara," I said gently, "if Pike or Kincaid so much as suspects that strongbox exists—" "They already do," she cut in, voice trembling. "That's why they hired the Bellingtons to make an example of me. Kill the daughter, silence the father." Clay swore under his breath. "Fort Stockton's judge rides the same circuit as Pike. We bring charges there. They'll vanish." He looked at me. "Boone, you still know folks down south? Rangers you rode with when you quit bounty hunting?" "Few," I said. "Captain Len Callahan among them, a man who'd never traded honor for coin, but Rangers need hard proof before they saddle up." "That's what the strongbox is," Clara insisted. "Dates, acre counts, all written in Pike's own hand. But we have to move fast. Sunday service is in 36 hours. That church will be full of worshipers and easy targets." I glanced to the east. 2 hours till dawn, maybe 75 miles of rutted road between us and Dead Horse Bluff. With a fresh horse and no stops, you could do it in 10 hours if luck rode double. My arm ached like the devil, yet the choice felt clearer than daylight. "Clay, hitch 2 fresh mounts to the supply wagon. You ride with Wade Bellington shackled in the back. His testimony about Silas's orders from Pike will keep the circuit marshal curious long enough. Morrison and Donnelly can guard Eli's body until the coroner arrives." Clay nodded, already mapping the logistics. "And you?" "I'll take Clara home," I said. "We dig up that box, then meet you at Ranger Station 6 in Sweetwater tomorrow night." The sheriff offered his hand, rough palm warm against the chill. "I'll wire ahead. Captain Callahan will have men ready." Clara's fingers found mine, steady despite exhaustion. "My father will need protection," she said. "He's brave, but he's 67, and his heart's spent from fighting a giant he can't see." Clay tipped his hat. "Rangers can spare a pair of guns at the parsonage. With God's grace, Reverend Whitmore will see next Sunday's sunrise." A coal-black sky spread overhead, the Milky Way spilling like powdered sugar above the flatland. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted solemn, watchful. I helped Clara to her feet. She leaned against me, lighter than a sack of feed, but heavier than any promise I'd ever carried. Dusty snorted, ready despite the miles ahead. As we prepared to ride, I caught Clay's eye one last time. "This isn't just about land," I said. "It's about letting bullies decide who gets to dream beneath this wide Texas sky. We end it, Sheriff." He gave a single solemn nod. We end it. 6 months later, a crisp October breeze rustled the flag outside the courthouse in Sweetwater as Clara Whitmore leaned on Elias Boone's good arm. Inside, 12 men, among them Judge Everett Pike and Land Commissioner Randall Kincaid, were found guilty of fraud and conspiracy. Witness after witness spoke. Wade Bellington, still limping from that night's wound, testified under oath that old Silas took cash from the judge, then handed down the orders. Reverend Thomas Whitmore, thinner now, and walking with a cane, listened while jurors read the verdict. When the gavel finally fell, the room exhaled. Families who had nearly lost their acreage 400 acres here, 160 there hugged each other in the pews, and ranch hands removed their hats in quiet thanks. Later, Clara and Elias stepped onto the courthouse steps where the Texas sun burned bright as a new brand. Her rope scars had faded to pale threads. His shoulder still ached when the wind shifted, but both knew the price had been worth paying. Honest people kept their land, and a corrupt chain that stretched 200 miles had snapped for good. If this story teaches anything, it's that courage is not measured by age, appearance, or the color of a man's hair or lack of it. True courage is choosing to act when silence would be easier. Elias could have ridden past those tracks. Reverend Whitmore might have buried his evidence deeper. Clara could have surrendered to fear. Instead, they each made a single, stubborn choice to stand. For those of us pushing past 60 hands a little stiff, knees not what they were, remember, your voice, your experience, and your grit still matter. Justice, like an old cattle trail, is long and dusty, but it only stays clear when good folks keep riding it. Did Elias's stand remind you of a time you spoke up or wished you had? Share your story in the comments below so others can draw strength from it. And if you believe more people should hear tales where courage outguns cruelty, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Together, we'll keep the fires of decency burning bright on this channel.